I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
Hello and welcome to Faux News. I'm your host, Bo Hughes. Today is Liberation Day 2.0. With many of the reciprocal tariffs set to take effect, we will take a look into the Trump trade war.
So, if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers.
The Trump administration is claiming the authority to implement these tariffs under two pieces of legislation: the International Emergency Powers Act of 1977 and Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. On May 28th, a lower court had tried to block these tariffs, calling them illegal. The following day, the Trump administration put in a lawsuit that put the lower court's ruling on hold while it went into appeal. It is currently on appeal at the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals and will probably make its way to the Supreme Court. However, that court has ruled that while it is being deliberated, these tariffs can move forward.
No president has ever invoked what's known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to justify the use of tariffs. But the Trump administration argues that the tariffs will help deal with trade imbalances. It's also argued that higher tariffs specifically on China, Canada, and Mexico are needed to combat fentanyl trafficking into the U.S.
Though the reciprocal tariffs first announced by Trump in April were put on a 4-month pause, the effect of this new tariff policy by the Trump administration has already had a large effect. Already through August 5th of this year, gross tariff revenues by the U.S. have reached $129 billion. In recent years, dating back to 2017, the next highest year was 2022, when for the entire year, gross tariff revenues were $70 billion. So that amount from 2022 will very likely be doubled, if not triple, by the end of the year. A very key element of this is something called the de minimis rule. It was a sort of a loophole that was on the books that allowed, and many countries throughout the world have this similar rule, but it was a rule that was on the books that allowed products valued below a certain value amount, to not be tariffed or be subject to duties. This amount had been $200 for the U.S. in 2016, and then it was raised all the way up to $800. In recent years, it has been greatly exploited, particularly by Asian e-commerce giants Shein and Temu, and it has really flooded the market with these goods. In 2016, the amount of shipments, 2015, the amount of shipments that were qualifying as de minimis shipments were 134 million shipments for that year. By last year in 2024, that number had grown to 1.3 billion shipments qualifying as de minimis shipments. The Trump administration on July 31st signed an executive order completely outlawing de minimis shipments for the time being, which is a seismic shift in trade policy. The U.S. has not always had low single-digit tariff rates. In fact, under President McKinley, at the peak of American industrialization, tariffs reached 29%. The globalization framework that laid the basis for lower tariffs, not just in the U.S., but throughout much of the developed world, came about in 1947 when the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, was passed. This lowered barriers to trade. One of the main things that was done was, therefore, the lowering of tariffs. Prior to this, the U.S. had tariff rates usually in the double digits and the mid-teens, dating back to the 1920s. In 1946, in fact, immediately after World War II, the average tariff rate was 10%. When GATT was passed the following year, these rates began to decrease significantly into the ballpark of 5%, and they stayed within that range for the next 3 decades until the opening of China by Nixon in the early 70s, the oil embargoes, and numerous other factors all combined to bring this rate down even further below 5%. Another key inflection point in the U.S. of average tariff rates occurred during the first Clinton administration. In 1994, NAFTA was passed, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which eliminated virtually all tariffs between the three countries, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. The following year, in 1995, the World Trade Organization was established, which served as the successor to GATT and greatly expanded its membership to include 160 countries. These two things combined to even further reduce trade barriers and tariffs, which led to the U.S. having rates as low as 1.5% in the early 2000s. So the question becomes, has globalization and free trade been to the U.S.'s benefit in the long run? Or should the U.S. revert back to a post-World War II or pre-World War II system of higher tariffs and more protectionism? Economist Orrin Cass, who appeared on the Tucker Carlson show, had a very interesting and thought-provoking take on this.
My view is that the direction that Trump and the administration are going is exactly the right one. That the willingness to focus on how globalization failed, that free trade isn't real, it has not worked out the way it was promised, we need to move on to something else, is exactly right.
Free market economics, in the way that the United States was doing it, was not really an instrument, wasn't even a theory, it was like a physics principle.
Right.
It's just true. Okay, so, and to the extent that you deviate from it, you get punished. To the extent that you hew to it, you're rewarded because, like gravity, it's just real.
So, as you can see, Cass contends that free trade is not an irrefutable law of economics. He posits that the globalized free trade framework developed immediately post-World War II was largely a foreign relations tool to help combat the spread of communism, promote liberal democracy throughout the world, and help rebuild Europe and Japan after that devastating conflict.
It's like the most interesting thing I've heard in a long time. So you're saying that our economic model was not primarily an economic model, it was an instrument of foreign policy. It was like the centerpiece of the global order, post-war global order. And it wasn't like designed really to help the United States as much as it was to preserve stability around the world.
Is Cass right? I believe that he is. I think that we have been sleepwalked and misguided into believing that low barriers to trade are vital to a healthy modern economy and the only way to have a modern economy. I think that his notion that tariffs will act as an economic invisible hand to bring back vital industries to the U.S. is also a very good point. These vital industries, in short, being those necessary for national security, like those for defense products and our modern way of life, semiconductors, advanced magnets, rare earth materials, those types of things. It is absolutely necessary that these things be able to be produced in the U.S. at high levels. It's right that tariffs is one way to make companies produce these domestically.
In my view, tariffs are actually the free market approach. A tariff, it can be a very broad-based policy. You're not picking a particular industry. You're just saying, look, we are going to give an advantage to things made domestically. So whichever things make relatively speaking, the most sense to make domestically will come back.
So we will see where all this goes. In my opinion, I believe that it was necessary for a new paradigm to be put in place, that globalization has run its course, and that there needed to be something implemented as the next phase in the U.S. economic framework. That said, the haphazard and comical way that the Trump administration calculated these reciprocal tariffs that they laid out to the public and the world on Liberation Day will forever be known as Rose Garden economics. We will see where this goes. Numbers don't lie, and it will be very interesting to see how this plays out. So until next time, this is not fake news, it's faux news.